Hello and welcome to a new video tutorial on YouTube channel of tutorialspedia.com. This video tutorial is part of a series of Mule 4 video tutorials where I'm covering different basic as well as advanced topics related to Mule 4 ESP. We are going to cover a very interesting topic in this video tutorial, which is batch processing in Mule 4. We will see that how we can load and process bulk data in Mule 4, and we can achieve parallel processing to increase the efficiency of our message flows. Here is a little more detail about what we are going to cover in this video tutorial. We are going to take a simple use case where we will be fetching and loading data from a database table. We will be using MySQL database, and we will have employees data table in the database which has already some data. So we will query or fetch the data from this database table, and then we will see that how the power of batch processing in Mule works. We will have batch step, and in the batch step we will be generating JSON files. So we will have one JSON file for each of the record that we are going to fetch from the database table. Then we will go a little advanced, and we will see that how we can use batch aggregator. And in the batch aggregator scope, we will be seeing that how we can aggregate a set of data based on our own configuration, and we will be generating another set of files based on our own aggregation criteria. And next we will see that how we can have additional batch steps in our batch job, and we will see that how we can use accept expressions or accept conditions to have a conditional processing of the processors within the second batch step. And last but not least, we will also see that how we can observe and analyze the summary data at on complete phase. So basically what happens is that whenever our batch job is completed, MuleSoft provides or prepares summary data at the end on the on complete phase, and we can exactly understand how our batch job finished, how many of the records or how many of the records got successfully processed, and how much are the failures, and we have a little more detail about the entire batch job that has been executed. So now let's jump into the implementation part and see how we can achieve all this. So I have already created a project with the name Batch Processing Demo in Anypine Studio, and I haven't done any implementation yet. Before we start implementing the message flow, let me show you the database table that we are going to consider for this demonstration. So I have opened MySQL Workbench, and we have already a table with the name employees data, and the schema that I'm using is with the name tutorialspedia, and it has certain data already populated. So if I execute this, you can see that we have roughly around 14. Yeah, we have 14 employees with the data already available in this table. In the real scenarios, when we will be doing the batch processing in Mule 4, of course, you will go with the huge set of data, and you can expect that with a very huge set of data, you are getting the benefits of this parallel processing in Mule 4. But in our scenario, since this is just a demonstration, so we will consider this set of 14 employees as our bulk data for our example scenario. Okay, so let me first create a message flow. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a scheduler, and based on the scheduler, I will be fetching data from the database table, and then we will be doing the batch processing. So let me just drag and drop scheduler into the flow, and we got a flow created, and let's rename this flow to batch processing. Okay, so the scheduler, we are going to configure it. Basically, what scheduler does is that it's going to schedule the flow of our process or our message flow. So here we specify what kind of frequency we want as a scheduling strategy, whether we want to have a cron job or a fixed frequency. So for us, for demonstration purpose, what we want is that we want to have this scheduler to start the process only once. So we will select time unit as hours, and we will choose frequency as 1, and without any start delay. So once every year this scheduler is going to initiate this message flow. Very simple. Next, what we are going to do, we are going to first, if you see by default, we don't have a database module available. So we will have to add the module. So we will click on add module and we are going to just drag this database module over here. And now we will have database module available uh, in order to use certain operations from this database module. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to use this select operation and I'm going to drop it into the process. All right, so once you have selected this, the next step is to have the configuration for the connector. So I'll click on this plus button, and once you click on this plus button, then you will have to select what kind of connection you want. I'm going to use MySQL connection, so I will choose MySQL connection from the drop down, and it will ask me to select the driver. You have two options, three options rather. You have you can choose add recommended libraries, you can use a local file, or you can use a Maven dependency. I have already this jar for MySQL connector available locally, so I will choose this option of using local file, and I'll just browse it and I will choose the file. So my file is available here, MySQL connector. So once you select your file, then you can click on OK, and you can see that now it has a green tick button, which means we are fine with this. Okay, now we will add some more detail for the connection. There are two options. One is that you can use a global properties file and refer to that. I have already created a video how you can use global properties, and I'll put the link in the suggestion box. But for the sake of simplicity here, I'm going to just hard code connection details. Localhost, and my port is 3306, and username I'm going to use whatever username I have, and then the database schema that I'm going to use is tutorialspedia. And if I click on test connection, if everything is fine, then I should get a success response. So we can see that test connection is successful, which means we are good to go. I'll just click on OK. Okay, so now what I want to do is that I want to just query the data from the database table. I will pick the same query that I used here. Select static from tutorialspedia.employee data. Since you already mentioned the schema, so you don't need to write tutorialspedia here. Even if you write, that's not a problem, but since it will work without this, so let's keep it simple. So we will use select static from employees.data. Okay, so using this query, we will be fetching data from the database, and in the next step, what we will be doing, we are going to add a batch jobs. That's the main purpose, the main the core of this demo. So that's what we are going to do now. So things are going to be interesting from here onwards. So we will just choose this batch job option from the core module and drag it over here. So now we have batch job. So you can see inside that it has one batch step. Inside process, we have to add processors or aggregators, and then we have on complete. So these are different phases that are available for any batch job. So the name by default is whatever the name of your project, batch processing demo, and then batch job. So if you want to rename, you can rename it. And it has several options available: max failed records, how many max failed records you can tolerate or you can accept. And if it reaches to that max, which is by default 0, then it will be going into the error. And then you have scheduling strategy. We are not going to play with most of these things. And there is a batch block size, which is by default 100. So this is the size of each batch which is going to be processed in parallel. In our case, we have only 15 records, 14 records. So let's put it 5. So we want to create a batch size, block size of 5. So batch block size is going to be 5. So in total, we have 14 records. So we will have 5 plus 5 plus 4. So we will have 3 batches. Okay, so let's put it like this and not make any other changes. And next we are going to have processors within the batch step. So this is the first batch step which we are going to process. So what I'm going to do in the first batch step is that I'm going to create one file for each of the record that I'm going to fetch from the database. So for that purpose, I will have to add the module file module. So let's go to the add module and select file. Remember that this is just an example scenario where I'm generating the file. In your actual production scenarios, you might have other requirements. For example, maybe you have to send the data to a JMS queue. Maybe you have to call some other flows to do some other kind of logic. Maybe you are going to use Kafka. Maybe you are going to have some other logic. So it purely depends on what kind of implementation scenario you are going to cover. But for the sake of simplicity here, I'm just going to use this option to write files for each record. So I'll use this write file and I'll add it into the processors within the batch job. Okay, so here we are going to use the connector configuration. I'll click on plus button and we will choose check this checkbox for connections, and here I'm going to specify C colon slash test slash, I have a folder already created, employees. So I want to use this folder. Okay, so this is the folder which we are going to use as a working directory, and we will just click on OK. Okay, so the next step that we want to do is that we want to write data to this file for every record. So what it will do is that it will create load the when it will go into the load phase, it will load all the records which have been fetched. It will create a persistent queue. It will load those records into that persistent queue. It will create a batch job instance, and after that, when it goes into the process phase, it will start processing all of the batch steps one by one. So first we have only one step right now, batch step one. So this one is going to be processed. So within that, we are going to use this option of write file, and here we are going to specify what is going to be the file name. So let me write it as employee dot. So here the path will be payload dot empid, because I want to create file based on the name ID of the employee, and I'll just concatenate .json. So let me do it as string plus plus dot .json. So you might have guessed that if we try to write it as JSON, it will give us an error, because when we fetch the data from the database, if you see the payload, it's an object, so it's in the form of Java, not in the form of JSON. That means we have two options here. We can use a transform message before this write, and within that transformer we can transform it into the JSON and then write it to the file. The other option is we can do the same transformation directly over here. So that's what I'm going to do. Output application slash JSON, and then we will have to separate it, and then we will write payload. So now what we will do, that we will be writing the output, that the record that we are fetching from the database one by one within this batch step as JSON into the file with the name with the name same as the ID of the employee. Okay. Right. So once we will be writing one by one all of these records into the JSON files. Next step we want is that we want to have another aggregated file. Since we set the batch job size as three, as 5, sorry. So we have 5 records in each of the batch. So what we want is that we want to aggregate and we want to create one file for those as well. For that purpose, I will add another aggregator here. So I'll go to core, so I'll select batch aggregator and drop it into the aggregator part. So here we are going to select what is the aggregator size. So let's add the aggregator size as 5. So we will aggregate 5 records into as one. And once we have that aggregation done, within this, whatever logic we will write, that will act on that aggregated set of 5 records. So what we want to do is that for those aggregated 5 records, we want to write another file. Okay, so the path I will put here is going to be what I will do. I will choose now, which is the date time dot milliseconds. Just this is just an example. So what I want is that whatever is the current milliseconds, I want to use that as the name of this file. This is not a real logic, just to make sure that it's unique and it is identifiable, I'm going to use this logic. So now is a function which gives us current date time, and then we will have dot milliseconds plus plus dot json. So this is the file that I want to create. Let me use as string. It's always better whenever you are using concatenation, you should make it as string so that you don't get any error. Okay, so here again I will do the same logic. Output application slash json, and then we will be writing the payload. So what we have done so far is that we are writing one by one each file within the batch for the records that we are fetching. So we are setting batch size as 5, and then we are aggregating and we are creating one file of all those aggregated records. Right. So now if you run this, you should get everything as we have mentioned here. And then we can have another step, which can be second step. So in the second step, we can have an accept expression or a condition. And based on that condition, we can go to it. So before we go into that, let's run it once and see how we get the results. And then we will make it a little advanced, and we will be adding second batch step. So let me save everything and run it, and we can see how it's going to create all the files, how it's going to perform all of the steps, and how it's going to handle the aggregation. So I'll run this. It will take a few minutes, and then after that it will be running into the embedded Mule runtime. So we can see the status as deployed. So if you see here, since we didn't run in debug mode, we run it in the normal run mode, we can see that it has done everything. So let me open the console and see what exactly happened. So it is deployed. After that, if you see here, it is showing us in the logs that it has created a batch instance with the instance ID, and then because that's the first step in the load phase. And then if you see here, it says that starting loading phase for the instance. So it started loading phase, and here it says that 14 records were loaded. So it created a persistent queue and loaded 14 records. And then it says started execution of instance because it went into the execution phase. And then if you keep going, you can see that it has, at the summary level, it says that total records processed 14, successful records 14, failed records 0, and it has all other details that we have. So it says everything has done. So now let's go into the folder where we have created the files and see did it actually did everything or not. All right. So here if you see, we have all the files created: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, because we don't have employee ID 10, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Right, so this means that all of the files have been created. If you open any of the file, we can see this is for the employee with ID 1. So this employee has employee ID 1, and it has all the information for that employee in the JSON format. But you might have observed that still there is a problem that the aggregated file hasn't been created. So now we need to identify what went wrong that we did not get the aggregated file created, because this aggregated file should have also been created. So the reason, very simple, is that I did not specify the select the connector config, so it has created file somewhere else in the default. That we can identify from the console as well, because whenever we don't specify, it creates somewhere else. So here you can see it says file connector config does not specify the working directory, and it has created in the default, which is C user admin. But we want to run it again, so we want to create it in the same folder. So let me go here and select the connector config. And now, okay, so before that, let me clear the previous files. Okay, now I will just save it since it's already running in the Mule. So okay, since it's already running, so if we go into the console, we will see that it should have been already the changes should have been reloaded, and after that we should be seeing the files. So yeah, you can see here now we have files up till 15, but we have 3 additional files created based on the milliseconds: 107, 826, 964. If we open any of that, we should have an aggregated set of records within there. So you can see first, second, third, fourth. Yeah, this is the third file, so it has 4 employees within this, because we have 5 plus 5 plus 4. So we have this aggregation based on the batches. So if you open this one, you should see here. Okay, sorry. Yeah, this one. So you should see 5 records over here: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is how we did the aggregation. All right. So the next thing, so far so good. So next thing that we want to do is that we want to add another batch step. So I'll go again to the core and I will choose batch step, and I will just add it over here. So now you see in our batch job we have this batch step, which is the first batch step, and batch step 1, which is actually the second batch step. So let's rename it to second batch step second. Okay, so here in the accept expression, we want to specify certain condition that only if that condition is fulfilled, then it should go into this batch step. So what will happen is that first batch step, which is batch underscore step, will be running in any case, but this batch step second that we just created, this the processors within this batch step will be executed only if certain condition is fulfilled. So here we want to put the condition, which is payload.emp. Okay, if you see, we have employee department, we have employee status, employee name, employee code. So we want to use employee department. So we want to say that if payload.employee department equal let's put as HR. Okay, only then this particular batch step should be executed. Okay, so if I save it, okay, right now we did not add any processor within this. So what I'm going to use is that I'm going to use file and I'm going to write. So what we want is that whenever there is an employee whose department is HR, I want to generate another additional XML file. So in real scenario, maybe you want to take another action, but in this case, what I want to do to keep it simple, I just want to write an XML file for that employee. So what I will do here, file path payload dot employee id as string plus plus dot xml. So if we want to write it in as an xml, first we will have to do the required transformations. So instead of doing the transformation here, let me do one thing. I'm going to add a transformer. In the previous case we did the transformation directly over there, but in this case just I want to add a transform message before this. So here in this transform message we will be making the required changes. Okay, so here I want to change it into XML, and here what I'm going to do is that I will write employee, and the data that I want to write employee ID. This is going to be payload.empid. I want to put only two information here: employee name, payload.employee name. So only two things to make it a simple XML. So I just save it. Let me clear everything from here. Since it's already running, so we might have deleted the actual file. So let me delete everything, and then I will make some change and save it again. Okay, I will name it as employee full name, and I'll save it. So now we should see that our file should get generated. It's loading right now, the changes that we have done. There is something wrong. Let me fix that. So basically the mistake is that previously I set it as payload.empid, but here we have generated XML and it is now payload.employee ID. There is no empid in the payload. So we will have to change it payload.employee.employee ID. Okay. So now if, okay, let me clear it again. Now if I save it, it will get loaded and we should be getting the results as required. So let's wait for the files to get generated over here in the employee folder. We can go to the console. Still loading. Okay. So now if you see here, let me sort it based on type. So we have JSON files up till here. We have 3 aggregated JSONs and we have 2 XML files generated. Why we have 2 XML files generated? Because we set the except expression that if the employee department is HR, only then XML should be generated. So if you open any of these XML files, like I opened 2.xml, if you see here we have Mark Wood and its employee ID is 2, and for this one we have XML file generated. So if you see employee ID 2 Mark Wood, this is from the HR, and we have 7 Deepak P, which is also HR. So we should have another file with the 7.xml, which is again because we have this expression as HR. So we have basically demonstrated how we can use accept expression, and based on that we can execute multiple steps within our batch job. Now if you see here we have a summary that has been generated. We can see that in the log, but we want to generate a summary file as well. For that purpose what I will be doing is that in the on complete I want to generate a summary file. So I will just use another write operation over here, and within this I will choose the same file config as the connector configuration, and the path that I want to specify is just summary.json. So I want to generate a JSON file uh, as a summary. Okay, and the payload here I want to change it to JSON output application slash JSON. Okay, so now whatever will be the payload at the on complete phase, that I want to save into the summary.json file. Okay, so now let's wait for it to get executed. We can see we have a summary.json file created. If you open it, it's trying to reload the other files. So if you see here, now we have a full summary available. It says on complete phase, there is no exception. There is no loading phase exception. Total records 14. This is the total elapsed time. Loaded records 14, filled records 0, and some other information like their job instance ID, processed record, successful record. So in this way, we are getting a complete summary of all the executions that happened as part of this batch job. Of course, you can have additional step. Maybe you can send an email to the respective teams or respective resources or employees or departments about this summary information. You can maybe load it to some other file system or some database or any other action that you want to perform. But this is how we achieve batch processing in Mule 4, and it's very powerful option available for processing our bulk records in parallel, and we can increase the performance, because in the normal scenario if you're using for each scope, that is in the sequential manner, and that's not using any persistent queues, or there is no queuing or loading mechanism. But in this scenario with the batch jobs, you are achieving this, and you can use it for your ETL processes, or you can use it for any other type of batch processing that you want to achieve. So that's it from this batch processing video tutorial. I hope that the information that I conveyed through a simple demonstration is helpful for you. If you have any questions, you can always write in the comment section. And for the further reading, you can always refer to other tutorials on this playlist that I have created for the MuleSoft on my Tutorialspedia YouTube channel, where you are watching this video. And also, you can always refer to the official MuleSoft documentation, as official documentation from MuleSoft is quite handy and powerful and provides you latest information. Thank you very much, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed before.